Big Ten play begins this week. It's a short week against Rutgers. We break it down, take a look at the Big Ten, and we do it with a special guest. All today, Locked On Hawkeyes.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. I've been covering the Hawkeyes for over 20 years on the radio here in the state of Iowa, including currently on the Iowa Sports Radio Network with stations in Des Moines, Sioux City, Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, and the Quad Cities. You can hear me each weekday from noon to 2. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Today, it's a different day. Tuesdays with Todd. There he is, Todd Brommelkamp. If you're watching us on YouTube, longtime radio voice of the Hawkeyes, a magazine and website, and a whole lot more. Todd, good to see you once again. And we're not doing it in a casino, which is a little bit weirder, a bar, but good to see you, Todd.
Good to see you too, Trent. I could have grabbed my Circa hat. We could have been twins today.
Yes, absolutely. And a place that certainly is near and dear to our hearts, and a lot of great things certainly happening with those guys. Well, Todd, glad to get you aboard here, and something that we're hope to be able to do here in the coming weeks as we make our way through football season. Keep your voice out there for people maybe not on the east side of the state, miss the news. Unfortunate, and it's the industry that we both work in. Disappointing for you, I'm certainly, but I'll refresh the people out there, some Hawkeye fans that maybe hadn't heard the news of why you're no longer on the air.
Yeah, I was let go by 1600 ESPN in Cedar Rapids on August 5th, and just a cost-cutting measure, which, as you said, you know the business as well as I do at this point. So I think the unemployed hanger-on says it all at this point. So we'll see what comes next if something pops up, but still keeping an eye on the Hawkeyes and seeing what's going on there, and appreciate all my media friends who still attempt to keep me somewhat relevant.
You have been around for all of the Kirk Ferentz. Yeah, in one way or the other. And when I was at Iowa, was reading your newspaper articles at the Daily Iowan. So you've been a part of this for a long time, and then continuing afterwards. You know Kirk incredibly well. And on a Saturday night, as we saw the record broken, as he passes Woody Hayes for the most wins in Big Ten history, as we were leading into it, we knew we were getting closer and closer. I didn't know how big of a deal it was, but seeing obviously the emotion for him, that's not a surprise. We know Kirk's an emotional guy, but seeing him run off the field in the swarm, something he had never done before, that was a moment that I wasn't ready for. And then finding out that he'd never done that before, and I wasn't sure if there was a moment that I missed or something like that, that was impactful to me. Take us in on what going to 206, what that means for somebody like you that has been close to the scene for a very long time.
Oh, yeah. I was there for number 1 in the student section against Northern Illinois. We stormed the field that night, and that wound up being the only win of that 1999 season. So I have been along for most of the ride, and unfortunately was watching 206 on the couch here at home. But I noticed that as well. I thought it was cool that Anthony Herron got to do the post-game interview with him, ties everything back to that first year. And the coming off the field is part of the swarm, because he usually sticks behind and does the media interviews and then comes in afterwards. So that stuck out to me as well as being something that I don't know whether he was a huge fan of, but I think it was a way for the team to, loop him in on that milestone, and just seeing them stand there with him after the game was over. And as you mentioned, he's an emotional guy. Actually, the biggest surprise to me was how he held his emotions in check for the most part. I mean, there were some tears, but he has a tendency to really lose it at times. And that was what I was expecting, but I think he's had a while to prepare for this moment and compartmentalize it. So after they lost to Iowa State, it was all but given that this was going to be the game that it was going to happen in. So incredibly happy for him. 27 years in one place. You and I are radio veterans. One of the favorite topics is always unbreakable records. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you'll see a Big Ten coach that's going to even come close to what Kirk Ferentz is going to wind up, especially if he sticks around for another couple years.
Adds a little bit more to that. Yeah, even look at a guy like James Franklin. I mean, he's 100 wins behind where Kirk is, and with the pressure cooker that is Penn State. Now, if he doesn't get it done this year, we know the pressure that comes. Same thing with Ryan Day. I mean, he was as good as fired last November, and then he goes on and wins the national championship. And for some people there, it's still not good enough. I mean, just the longevity, and that goes hand in hand with Kirk. Now, we've both taken the phone calls, right? We've heard from the listeners. I see it here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast, people that are ready for a change, ready to move on. I am one of the people that continually go back to Dr. Tom. As we were in school at the time, it was year was Dr. Tom's final season. So
Yep.
remember it well. And I have that because, yes, there's frustrations. And do I get pissed off at the passing game and what could have been with some of those great defenses these last 5 years with more out of the offense? Absolutely. But I still have that big picture view. And the likelihood that the next coach, regardless of who it is going to be a more consistent winner than what Kirk Ferentz has been, and certainly has been these last 6-7 years. That's going to be incredibly difficult for anybody to duplicate. So I know people want more. They want change. And for many people, it's just change for the sake of change because it can be very boring. But when you look at the big picture view, Iowa's had it really good these 27 years.
They really have. And this is a topic that has come up a lot. As a matter of fact, I was just talking about it last week on another show. I always look at Purdue. Purdue had it really good with Joe Tiller and then sort of pushed him into retirement. Very similar to the Tom Davis situation that you bring up. And Danny Hope did not get it done. And then Darrell Hazel did not get it. And they just continually got worse and worse to the point where they're completely irrelevant right now in the Big Ten. And when you're at Iowa, you're a lot closer to being a Purdue than you are to being an Ohio State. So I understand. I mean, 2 years ago, I wrote that maybe it was time for Kirk to step aside. And I didn't expect him to want to live and operate in this world with schools on the West Coast and the Big Ten and NIL and the transfer portal. And the fact that he's still sticking around and continuing to do what he's doing, it takes a really unique situation and set of circumstances to last at someplace 27 years. And I think you go back and look at the ups and the downs. One thing with Kirk is the downs have been short-lived. They've always been able to pull up, whereas maybe you have like 3 subpar years in a row. That's what gets a coach in trouble. He's really avoided that for the most part. And our pal Matt Peralt calls him 8-4 Ferentz, and 8-4 gets it done at a place like Iowa. And I know the criticism is people accept mediocrity at 8-4, but look around college football. 8-4, especially in this era, when you go year in and year out, the consistency that they do, the developing the professional talent. And I know that doesn't have a whole lot to do with the results on the field in college, but he's been a great representative of the program. He's won more than he's lost. By and large, he's avoided major scandals. I mean, there have been some things in the past that have been bumps in the road for him, but yeah, it's one of those careful what you wish for. And everybody wants to go back to the Tom Davis era and change for the sake of change, and the grass isn't always greener on the other side of the hill. And Kirk is going to go when Kirk wants to go, but he's got to continue to figure out how to win in this era. And until I think he's under contract, for 6 more years? 29. Yeah. So sit back and enjoy the ride if you're an Iowa fan at this point, because nothing is going to change unless something drastic happens. And I don't think anybody wants to root for that. And when it's time for him to step aside, that's when the real fun begins, because I think they've got a couple guys on the staff that they could consider for the job. And Beth Getz is going to listen to some outside voices probably. And that's going to be way more intriguing than a lot of the action on the field has been.
Yes, and we saw some signs of life possibly out of the passing game against UMass. Todd Brommelkamp joining us here today. Trent and Todd on a Tuesday as we break things down. We're going to get into that passing game. Was it real, or is it just UMass was that bad? We'll talk about that as we continue on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right means cashing in. With football back, Prize Picks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you can turn takes into real prizes, all in less than 60 seconds. So much fun playing on Prize Picks, finding that more or less that you like, taking a look at the NFL. Maybe it's Josh Allen, more or less 270 yards passing in game. Saquon, more or less than 1 rushing TD. That's what's on the Prize Pick app. You can add them all up. And even if one of your picks misses, I love this part. Prize Picks invented the flex play, so you can still double your money. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Trent Condon back with you alongside Todd Brommelkamp here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Still workshopping here, TNT, Todd and Trent. Tuesdays with Todd. We got a lot going on here, but Todd, great to have you on here and talking some Hawkeyes with you. So taking it back to Saturday night and second play of the game, there's Sam Phillips wide open up the left side. Looked like it was not the first read either, as it did look like Mark Gronowski was maybe looking for the post over top and then found him. So going through his progressions, I thought that was a positive. The RPO then after that for the touchdown, it wasn't a ton of it, but still 120 yards passing in the first quarter. That doesn't happen very often. But then we put in the caveat. It was UMass.
Yeah.
Todd, we've seen some bad teams make their way into Kinnick Stadium. That one might have been one of the worst.
I cannot recall a time in my 26 years of being around that a worse team played in Kinnick Stadium, but they did what they needed to do against a bad team, which is something that they sometimes have not done under Kirk Ferentz. And I was interested to see just exactly whether they would keep things rolling there, especially late in the game. And when they got Hank Brown in there and gave him the opportunity to throw the ball around too, instead of just handing off and trying to run the clock out. The caveat is, yeah, that was a really bad UMass team, but it was also, I think you saw a lot of the things that made Mark Gronowski such a winner at South Dakota State. And now it becomes a question of, did it just take him some time to get used to things at Iowa and knock the rust off? And is this going to be the Mark Gronowski that we see moving forward? Or was he taking advantage of a lesser team? And now there are no UMasses on the schedule at this point. Even the Rutgerses of the Big Ten, which short week on Friday, that'll be fascinating to see how Iowa responds there with their first Big Ten road trip of the season. But yeah, I think you walk away from Saturday night, at least I do, feeling far better about Gronowski than you do with apprehension that there's still an issue. I mean, some of the throws that he made on Saturday night, not anybody can walk in off the street and make some of those throws. And granted, it was against UMass, but I think you saw a little bit of, the relationship with the receivers. They seem to be a little bit more on the same page. And he's doing this without Addison Ostrenga, which at Iowa, the tight end is always going to be the safety blanket, especially for a quarterback that's struggling. So I came away very impressed with him on Saturday night, and we'll see what he does in the Big Ten. But yeah, I think this one had a little bit more of Tim Lester's DNA on it.
I walked away impressed, and I've been pretty hard on Gronowski the first couple of weeks, and
rightfully so.
Yeah, damaged goods. Here we go again, because we played this song and dance, and when you do it, we do, Todd, and you're talking about it every single day, and it gets frustrating. And I was frustrated what we saw in Albany and against Iowa State. And the crazy thing is, going back to the open kids practice, they were taking more shots in that practice than they ever have, and you could tell kind of right away, all right, this is going to be a passing day. This is going to be one of those practices where they were working on it, but they were taking shots down the field. One of my buddies goes, he's going to drive Kirk nuts, all these chances he's taken down the field. And then the first 2 weeks, we don't see any of that. There was absolutely none of it. I think it's still there. Maybe it's Lester also starting to understand what are the best things for him too. Without that spring practice, which I'll be honest, I kind of poo-pooed that initially because he was such a veteran guy coming in.
Yeah.
But it was probably more important than I laid credence to at the beginning, because it's not just about getting reps with the team and your receivers and all those things. It's learning with the coaching staff, what this guy does best. And I feel like they're getting there. Rutgers, this is another team that you can do it against. Not a great defense this year for Rutgers. They're built a little bit different than they've been in the past. And then the week after that, I was going to have to score. And that's been my argument all throughout this offseason leading into the year. is Iowa cannot afford to think, oh, we're going to get it 17-13. We're going to grind out a 13-9 win. That's not the case. With Indiana, with Penn State, with Oregon on your schedule, USC, those four teams coupled with the rivalry games still to come, Iowa's going to have different points this year. They're going to have to win a game 31-27. They have to show that ability. And I guess I'm a little bit more hopeful than I was a week ago.
Yeah, if you look back at most of Kirk's successful seasons, you beat the teams that you're supposed to beat. Maybe you lose to the teams that you're not supposed to beat, but you pick one of those teams off. Well, they got Indiana coming up. They got Oregon coming up. Penn State about a month from now. One of those three games is going to have to go in the win column. And right now, I'm having a hard time figuring out which one that I would give the Hawkeyes. They're not elite on any of the three sides of the football. The offense is okay. The defense, I think, is good and has a chance to be very good. And granted, we saw some elite special teams play on Saturday, but again, the caveat there is it was against UMass. So in order for Iowa to have a very successful season, I think they've got to be better in two of those three aspects. And obviously they've gotten by with defense and special teams the last several years, and they're probably going to need to do that again this year. But we'll see what happens when the Big Ten play rolls around. This is a game, short week, and going on the road, you always worry a little bit about it, but it's going east instead of going west. Last year they got snake bit with that UCLA game, which, boy, does that really stand out now that Deshaun Foster got left go. But this one, I think, sets up a little bit better for Iowa. And I'm like you. I'm interested to see whether or not this is a continued expansion of throwing the ball and taking some more shots, or whether now that they get into Big Ten play, do they tend to get a little bit more conservative again, and maybe Kirk puts his thumb on the scale. I'm optimistic that that's not the case, because I do believe that he has given Tim Lester a little bit more leeway than he has given his previous three offensive coordinators. But time will tell. Time will tell.
Speaking of that, obviously your connection and being as close to the program as you've been throughout the years, I hear this all the time. I get the comments. I read the social media and the comments on YouTube. This is just Kirk's offense, right? This is just Kirk's offense. And I know you've heard it before. We've had different versions of the offense. It's still going to be 50-50, right? Run-based. It's not going to be spread it out. That's not what they're going to be. But when we talk about, say, an individual game plan, like I hated the game plan against Iowa State and what they were trying to do in that game. When it comes to a week-to-week basis, how much input does Kirk Ferentz have on the offensive philosophy going into a game? Not the decisions game day, going forward on fourth down, those kind of things, but planning leading into the game offensively.
I think when you're an offensive coordinator, a defensive coordinator, you always want to serve your master. I mean, the hierarchy of who's in charge of that football program. So I think even if somebody were to be given 100% control over offense, defense, special teams, you still probably have that little devil and angel on your shoulders, little Kirk here and little Kirk there. So, he, I think, has an overarching input on things. I think Tim Lester probably has more leeway than the previous three offensive coordinators have. I really like to see that slow mesh a couple weeks ago against Iowa State. They don't really use that on Saturday. They didn't really need to. I think you're going to see that in the Big Ten. And that's a side effect of Warren Ruggiero coming in from Wake Forest. And I think Kirk has understood here in the last couple of years that it can't be his way or the highway. So it's still very much his offense. And I think Tim Lester's been able to put his fingerprints on it more so than anybody else, almost by necessity. And again, that's Kirk Ferentz realizing that after 27 years, you got to change some things. And the one thing that I've pointed out about Lester is he's a former head coach. Granted, it was in the MAC at Western Michigan, but if you look at Kirk's staffs, he hasn't really had a whole lot of former head coaches on the staff. And I think there is a trust level when you work with somebody who has walked in your shoes, granted to a lesser extent, but I think that head coaching experience has really allowed Kirk Ferentz to maybe trust Tim Lester a little bit more than he would somebody else.
One final thing, you're talking about the defense, and I really like what we see now of this defense. I think they're maybe even a step ahead of what I thought even with the lack of turnovers forced at this point. I think Harrell's taken steps forward and getting his feet wet at that middle linebacker spot, and the rest of the guys. But it was special teams because, Weishan was doing his thing. He's running all over the field. He's mad when he gets tackled at the 20-yard line. And then a couple of returns later, takes one back to the house, sets records, doing Iowa special teams thing.
Yeah.
But when Drew Stevens missed the extra point and missed a field goal, and the snaps were a little bit off, and it just felt, and my mind went right back to 2 years ago at the end of the season when he was in as bad of a headspace, and it's Marshall Meter coming in to kick the game winner against Nebraska and barely could get it over the crossboard. That's how bad of a spot Iowa was. Maybe it's just me, but right away I said, Iowa can't afford this. Iowa can't afford, when we're talking about, even if I was going to put together another nice, solid 8-4 year, they can't afford to leave points on the board. And those Stevens memories definitely jump to the front of my mind.
Yeah, like I said, Iowa traditionally has been elite in special teams, and I don't think you can call them that this year right now. But the more I look at this team through 3 games in all 3 aspects, I think what you're looking at here is another Kirk Ferentz type of special where they get better gradually as the year goes on. And I think it's a safe bet to say that they'll probably be playing a lot better football in November than they are right now. Mm-hmm. But it's a matter of how well they navigate that middle portion of the schedule as to how meaningful those November games are.
One of those big ones, a trip out to USC. We talked about those woes as they went out there. Short week a year ago against UCLA. And even in that game, they jumped out to a 10-0 lead. And then Brendan Sullivan gets hurt. And here comes Jackson Stratton. Yeah. And they fall by a field goal in that one. Short week this week. We'll talk a little bit more about the matchup against Rutgers. Big Ten play begins. And Todd, he's a degenerate like myself. He likes to gamble. We'll see if he's got any picks for us. It's Trent Condon, Todd Brommelkamp with you on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Stay right there. We're back with more in a moment. College football is back and couldn't be more excited about it. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping for you when you get to checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. Taking a look forward, Iowa back in Kinnick Stadium in that matchup against Indiana. 2:30 kickoff for that one. It's homecoming, and they have amazing deals. Some of your favorite college football games out there at great prices on Game Time. Plus, I love zone deals too. Pick a section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save big. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Trent and Todd back with you one final time on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for being with us and making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day, your daily Iowa Hawkeye podcast. Todd, it is Rutgers on Friday night. I'll mention, I was so good in these short weeks. They got out to a 10-0 lead, and then the wheels fell off with Sullivan. Yeah. Petrus maybe played his best game when they went out to Maryland a couple of years back when he was there. And then obviously the yearly game against Nebraska and just how buttoned up they seemingly are for that game every single time. That's why, in the summertime, as you know, looking for topics, looking for angles, right? Anything. And some people are pointing to this game as maybe a tricky spot at minimum for the team. I really didn't subscribe to it just because Kirk, I think he has the blueprint, right, of these short weeks and the way they have it set up.
Yeah, and I think Rutgers is a really good matchup for Kirk Ferentz, the way that he likes to approach football. Greg Schiano is kind of a little bit more of an old school coach, and I don't think that this is going to catch them off guard with the short week and going from a night game to a short week. I could see where people would be concerned about that, but I look at some of the previous times where they've gone out there and they've been there enough times to know that this is now a conference game. It's not going to feel like a non-conference game. And what is Iowa, 2.5?
Yeah, 2.5. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, this is a game that I look at and I think Iowa should be able to win it by 3 points or more. But I would I would stay away from that one from a betting standpoint. The totals got to be what, in the upper 40s?
It's lower than that. I think I
Is it
saw,
lower than that?
yeah, 44.5, I think, in the market, something like that. I'll pull it up here quickly and see what we have as it pops up here. Sitting right now at FanDuel at 45.5 is the number.
I could see that. The tendency for me is always to think you go under on those short week games, but I could see some points being scored in this one and maybe that creeping over. But I get your thoughts on this. This is not a great week when I look at the board.
Yes. Yeah. I thought the exact same thing. So I'm in one of the contests out in Vegas, the college contest with the Superbook, and we have to make 7 selections for college only in the week and no FBS versus FCS games in there. Yeah, it was a little bit tight coming up with my initial list where it feels like I'm kind of paring down. Not the case this week. The Big Ten, I think, has some weird ones too. One of the games I really do like, though, I love Purdue. I liked what we saw against USC. I think they finally have an adult back in the room. We talked about the Boilermakers a little bit early. And then, of course, the headliner in the Big Ten this week, Michigan, Nebraska. Currently, Michigan favored by 2.5 in that one over in Lincoln. That should be a really fun game, too. But yeah, an interesting week overall in the Big Ten, but across the landscape, and not a whole lot popping out.
Well, let me ask you, what would it take you to touch Nebraska in that game?
I would need certainly north of a field goal, and even at 3.5, I think that's going to be a low scoring game. That number currently is 45.5. Also, I think that one has 17-13, 2017, something like that written all over it. Maybe it's just my disdain for Ayola. Maybe that is clouding it a little bit. Underwood making a second road start. He's shown signs, but that environment against Oklahoma definitely got to him. I think this thing's going to be low scoring affair.
The game that I'm looking at here is Indiana and Illinois, and I see the number moving for Indiana. It's up to 5.5 now. I think it opened at 4.5. That's sort of the de facto elimination game early on in the big. If they get 4 teams in the playoff, I can't see Illinois and Indiana both getting in this year. And Kurt Signetti is not one to take his foot off the gas pedal. And you know how Brett Bielema operates. So I think that game's going to be absolute fun. And I think, Illinois plus 5.5 might be something to look at there. And I'll tell you what, if Indiana blows past Illinois at 5.5, then they're going to be a team to ride this year. Because again, given what Kurt Signetti does and how he approaches things, there's no letting off for him. But I saw what Michigan State's getting a ton of points too this weekend. It just, every week in the Big Ten, there's going to be some good team that overlooks a bad team. And I'm not calling for an outright upset, but that could be one there where Michigan State just is a big enough pest where they hang around and you're happy to get out of there with a 14-point win or something.
That one is interesting too. And speaking of that, there's already some talk about potential candidates at UCLA. We brought that up and talking about the Bruins program and what could be there. I understand Michigan State's off to a really good start, but Jonathan Smith, he's a West Coast guy. If it doesn't go very well in year number 2 for him, if he's maybe looking to pull that parachute and getting out ahead of the posse, if you will, for Michigan State, if they limp to a 5-7, don't get back to a bowl game here, and maybe that's a direction that they can go, because the UCLA job, it's a tough job. Chip Kelly, he left there, and Chip Kelly also could have been the offensive coordinator here, as a conversation maybe we'll get to down the line sometime. But Todd, it's a tough job there, and that's one that I wonder about. And a 10 o'clock kickoff Central Time, 11 o'clock Eastern for them. Talk about body clock. We talk about all those West Coast teams coming here for the 11 a.m. Central kickoffs. Going to be different for those Spartan players.
I think it definitely is way more important for the teams to be on the West Coast playing those games than coming in the opposite direction. And that'd be my biggest concern there with that Michigan State game, because it could get out of hand if those guys are a little groggy. But you want to talk about a job that I don't think perception meets reality. It's UCLA. I think a lot of people were shocked when Chip Kelly left a couple years ago. And the reality is that they don't have a whole lot of money. The whole reason that they joined the Big Ten was financial. So it's going to take the right coach with the right mindset to take that job. And there's no guarantee that they can succeed there.
Tough one, no doubt. A couple of early leans for you here early in the week as we're joined by Todd Brommelkamp. Great to have you aboard with us here today, Todd. Been a lot of fun breaking things down and Tuesdays worked out pretty well. Hopefully we can make this happen here during football season at minimum here the next few weeks.
As you can see, I have a lot of time on my hands.
Great catching up with you. That's Todd Brommelkamp. You can find him on Twitter and always talking Hawkeyes. Tuesdays with Todd here on Locked On Hawkeyes. Thanks for being with us as always and making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Until then, go Hawks.